If we told you that in the summer of 2018, masked gunmen used angle grinders and distraction bombs to break out of a prison, you'd probably think we were talking about a movie. But this really happened. The room that the gunmen forced themselves into was a French prison visitor's room, where they grabbed convict Redouane Faïd and led him to a hijacked helicopter that was waiting outside. The pilot was being held hostage by the armed men. The whole operation took less than 10 minutes, and France's justice minister even called the prison break a spectacular escape. Surprisingly enough, this wasn't the first time that Faïd had escaped. He busted his way out back in 2013 with the help of explosives. That escape happened just 30 minutes after he'd arrived at the prison. The reason that Faïd sounds like a character from an action movie is because his life of crime is heavily inspired by Hollywood gangster films. He's especially fond of American director Michael Mann and his 1995 heist movie, Heat. He's even called Mann his technical advisor and a kind of mentor. As spectacular as his helicopter getaway was, he was recaptured a few months later. He is currently serving the rest of his sentence in a high-security facility for a botched robbery that he masterminded back in 2010. According to Faïd, take away the cinema and you would have 50% less crime. It's nearly impossible to escape without a little help from some friends. And El Chapo seems to have a lot of friends who are willing to put themselves out on a limb for him. The Mexican drug kingpin escaped from the maximum security Altiplano prison back in July 2015 through a mile-long tunnel that was dug out under the shower of his jail cell. This tunnel was equipped with lighting and ventilation, and it led to a nearby construction site. El Chapo had only been in prison for a little more than a year before he made this escape. Before that, he'd been on the run for 13 years after breaking out of another maximum security prison back in 2001. He had bribed top security prison guards to help him escape that time. Hiding in a cart of dirty laundry, a guard wheeled him out of the prison to freedom, where a getaway car was waiting for him. Like we said earlier, he managed to evade the authorities for 13 years that time. But, sadly for this drug trafficking mastermind, his second taste of freedom didn't even last a year. He was recaptured in January 2016 after a shootout with Mexican Marines. 5 people were fatally injured during the operation. A lot of prisoners choose to break out to avoid spending decades rotting away, but Arnold Nash decided to escape with only a couple months left of his 45-year sentence. He was actually going to be released early due to good behavior. While it's unclear how he left the main correctional facility unseen in September 2018, some believe that Nash was trying to get more time added onto his sentence. The 65-year-old has been in and out of prison since his teens, so he doesn't really know life outside of jail. He didn't even put up a struggle when he was recaptured after a 5-day manhunt. This is the 3rd time that Nash has escaped prison, and his second prison break was quite spectacular. In 1981, he and another prisoner escaped from Maine State Prison while doing supervised labor on a nearby farm. They managed to evade the police for 22 days by camping out in the woods. Their plan was to make it to the Canadian border, and they broke into properties along the way for supplies. Over 100 police officers, 18 dogs, a helicopter, and even a plane were used to track them down. While Nash seemed able to just walk away from prison on his own 2 legs, some prisoners have to get a bit crafty. Inmates at the Walker County Jail in Alabama used peanut butter, and they used it in the most genius way possible. After saving loads of peanut butter from their sandwiches, these inmates molded it like clay to change the number above a doorway that led outside. We're not sure how the guard didn't notice, but the change reportedly made the number above the outside door look like a number that would be found above a cell door. So when one of the peanut butter inmates asked the guard to open said door, the guard truly believed that he was just letting the convict back into his cell. We should mention that this was a rookie guard, which is something that the inmates definitely took advantage of. The guard opened the door, allowing 12 inmates to escape from the prison. When they got to the razor wire fence around the jail, they threw their blankets over it to climb over. According to the county sheriff, inmates are always trying to con jail employees, and the young guard made a human error. Thankfully, all 12 inmates were found by authorities within 48 hours. That prison break was chaotic, and it only involved a dozen escapees. Now imagine having to deal with 113 escaped inmates. In November 2018, 720 prisoners were let out of their cells at an Indonesian prison for their evening prayers. Authorities believe that the escape was planned among the prisoners in advance. Overcrowding is an issue in many Indonesian prisons, and the 113 escapees took advantage of this problem. They overpowered the guards and then used barbells to smash their way out of the prison's windows. The prisoners reportedly threw water bottles laced with chilies at the guards that tried to stop them. Once out, they all ran towards the rice fields nearby. While at least 24 of the 113 were recaptured the next day, a hunt was launched to look for those who remained at large. The prisoners still on the run were publicly asked by authorities to surrender themselves to the police within 3 days, and relatives were even urged to turn them in. Mass prison breaks seem to be quite common in Indonesia, as more than 400 inmates also escaped during prayer time in a nearby province back in May 2018. Using the power of numbers or getting help from the outside are tools that some prisoners are lucky to have, but convicts sometimes only have themselves to rely on. Richard Lee McNair is known for being an escape artist. The son of a police officer, former Air Force military police officer, and police informant himself, McNair's life did a 180 after he made some bad choices. After getting arrested in the late 80s, McNair first showed off his prison break abilities by using a tube of lip balm to slip his hands out of handcuffs while at a police station. He didn't make it too far though, and the handcuffs were put back on him after he tried to escape by jumping from the 3rd floor of the building. A few years later, McNair escaped from the North Dakota State Penitentiary after he crawled through a ventilation duct. He managed to evade authorities for nearly a year, but was sent to a maximum security federal prison in Louisiana when he was finally found. For his latest escape, in April 2006, McNair shipped himself out of prison by hiding inside a shrink-wrapped pallet full of mail bags. The worst part is that when McNair was finally in the clear, a police officer saw him running around town. The officer jokingly told him that he looked a lot like the escaped prisoner everyone was looking for, but McNair insisted he was just out for a run and smoothly talked his way out of any suspicion. Perhaps one of the most famous prison breaks in history is the 1962 escape from Alcatraz. Alcatraz was supposed to be an inescapable prison, as it's located on a small island that's surrounded by inhospitable waters. But many believe that Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin managed to escape and, more importantly, live to tell the tale. The men reportedly dug a tunnel out of their cells using sharpened spoons, left dummies behind their beds, and escaped on a raft that was made of 50 raincoats. While the FBI closed the case in 1979 and declared that it was unlikely that the men had survived the swim to mainland, an extract of a letter published by CBS San Francisco in January 2018 might prove otherwise. The letter, addressed to the FBI, was supposedly written by John Anglin. John wrote that he and his co-conspirators did indeed survive their escape from Alcatraz. While Frank and Clarence are no longer alive, John promised to tell the FBI where to find him, under the condition that he'd only receive a year-long jail sentence, and that he'd get medical treatment for his cancer. No one knows for sure if John really did write the letter, or if it's just a hoax. But a relative did tell CBS that the mother of the Anglin brothers used to regularly receive roses for years after their escape. And while these escapees used stolen raincoats for their getaway plan, Kenneth Conley and Joseph Banks stockpiled bed sheets and dental floss. In December 2012, the two convicted bank robbers made their escape from the 17th floor of a Chicago jail by climbing down a rope that they had made out of the latter items. They had to squeeze out of a 5-inch hole which they chiseled into their cell wall to achieve this incredible feat. When guards arrived to start their shift, they noticed the knotted rope hanging down alongside the building. Once free, the men hailed a cab. Banks was arrested just 2 days later, but Conley managed to stay undetected for 18 days. At his sentence hearing, Banks said this about his great escape: 17 stories, and I live to tell. Having survived the drop by the grace of God, even we have to admit that we're surprised that their dental floss rope contraption actually worked. We're also not sure how prison guards aren't noticing all these holes that are being created right under their noses, but that's an issue for another video. When it comes to convict Stephen Russell, he didn't even have to break out when he escaped from prison multiple times. They just let him out. A seasoned con man, the first time that he left prison, He did so in a workman disguise that he made out of various items stolen from the prison. The security guard saw his uniform and just let him out. The second time he left, he dressed himself up like a doctor and simply walked out. But for his most daring escape, Russell had to up his conman game. He feigned symptoms of AIDS for nearly a year and somehow snuck fraudulent health records into his medical file. He was eventually transferred to a nursing home, where he posed as a bogus doctor and convinced the prison by phone that he had passed away. Russell even once impersonated a judge over the phone to have his bail amount lowered by nearly $850,000. If you haven't already guessed, being a con artist is what got him into jail in the first place. In some rare cases, prison escapees are successful because there's someone in the inside who gets involved. That's exactly what got David Sweat and Richard Matt out of prison. In June 2015, the two convicted murderers escaped from Clinton Correctional Facility through holes that they had cut into their cell walls. These holes were made with power tools that had been smuggled in by a female guard. They continued to use the power tools along their journey to freedom through various tunnels, which eventually led out at a manhole off of the prison grounds. The whole escape reportedly took less than an hour. The guard who helped them, Joyce Mitchell, is believed to have been caught up in a love triangle with both men. A huge manhunt was put out for the two very dangerous men, who were making their way to the Canadian border. Matt was eventually taken down by authorities a few weeks later, and Sweat was found and taken into custody.